a quilted heart holding me at night. I patched together memories we made. In every square our love won't fade. With every fold I feel you near. In every stitch your love is clear.
Hello everybody, happy Friday. Hello, today is the 10th of October. Can you believe it? It just seemed like yesterday was the 1st of October. Actually, it feels like yesterday was the 1st of April, and time is flying by. Hello everybody. Welcome to part 6 of Festive Fancywork. How's your quilts coming along? How's everything going? I am up to date, current on the embroidered version. So you're going to see that here in just a second. First things first, I have to stay focused because my mind is somewhere else. So I have to rein myself in, okay? I am knee deep in the thralls of a t-shirt quilt, and it's the first t-shirt quilt that I've ever made like this one. So it's either going to turn out really phenomenal or I'm making a huge mistake. Harlan thinks it's going to be phenomenal, but I'm a little nervous, probably because it's the first time I'm doing it like this. So if you follow me on Facebook, my business page, Lisa Capen Quilts Facebook page, stay tuned. I'm not sharing pictures yet of it, but stay tuned to see it once I make a little progress, a little more progress on it. Hi everybody. So part 6. If you have already downloaded the file, right, the PDF, or yesterday I emailed everybody who has the embroidered version of it, okay, and you might have opened up the PDF from that. If you've noticed the little numbers, I knew, remember back in the very beginning, I said the numbers are going to be confusing, talking about for myself. It was 3, 1, but we were on part 4, whatever, you know. Tuesday, I sat down and made all of the PDFs from part 6 through the end of the quilt. And I had my list to make sure I didn't miss anything. And I had it in parts, like this is part 6. The video is part 6. Technically, it's part 6 of the quilt, but it's row 3 of the quilt. Isn't that confusing? So what you're going to see moving forward, because I don't have time to go back and do all of the PDFs over again. This week, it's 6-1, 6-2, 6-3, 6-4. That's because this is part 6. 1, 2, 3, and 4 blocks, right? I know I probably confused so many people with that, but it's actually the second part of row number 3. Okay, the blocks are all correct. I just numbered them for the part because it didn't dawn on me not to do that. Hi, everybody. Hello, hello, hello. It's so great to see y'all. So part 6, okay, but we're working, part 6 is the second half of row number 3. Not to cause mass confusion. I'm sorry about that. I'm going to hold up my finished up to this point quilt so you can see it, because I forgot to save a little snapshot of our progress that I could pull up here on the screen. But here we are. Isn't that cool? I think it's fantastic. So what we're going to do is we're going to break today's session up into 2 parts. The first part is really quick. I'm going to walk through just a little suggestion for those who are doing the embroidered version, because I changed things up. I added an extra basting box. If you've already started stitching, did you notice that? And then Dawn requested last week that I demonstrate Quilt-as-you-go with the applique version. So I made some examples for Dawn, and we're going to play around with that. Isn't that it is pretty, right? It's so pretty. Let's come down to my desk. Here we go. So yeah, part 6 is 1, 2, 3, 4. The last half of row number 3, right? And if you got the embroidered version, let's just talk for a second, because you're going to notice when you go to stitch it out that there is a red single basting box before it does another basting box and the quilting, right? All this gridded straight line quilting. The red basting box is there so that you can lay your naked batting in the hoop and stitch down the batting and then remove the hoop and trim away all the extra batting right up to that stitch line so that you don't have to trim the batting later down the road. Like I had to do last night, all of this extra, oh, I missed some right there. I had to go through and trim all that out because it does add a lot of thickness in your seams, right? And I was finding that a huge pain in my hind parts, okay? So I added that extra basting box, that's there. But I wanted to share with you all the blocks within the quilt. Like this block here is going to be surrounded by other blocks. So I trimmed all the batting on all 4 sides. But when I came to stitch out the 4th block of part number 6, this block falls along the edge of the quilt. So when I did my basting box of the naked batting, I removed my hoop, and the only batting I trimmed was top, left, and bottom. And I left the batting on the right side of this block so that the batting is there when I do my binding, right? Now, if you're going to add a border to this quilt, go ahead and trim that batting if you want to, right? But I'm just going to put a binding straight on this quilt. I'm not adding a border to it. And I want that binding to be full. So I'm leaving the batting on any blocks that fall along the outside edge of my quilt. And any of the blocks that fall on the inside of the quilt, I'm trimming the batting all on 4 sides. Okay, but that's what that little extra basting box is. And that's going to be there from now moving forward. Laurel says, I can't do this. I'm currently working on a baby quilt and some Christmas things. I missed the conversation though. Well, Laurel, I'm glad you're hanging out with us, even if you're not making the quilt. I know several are here today that either don't have time to make this quilt or don't have any desire to make this quilt, right? But they love hanging out with us, and we're so glad you're here. Anyway, right? And sometimes you pick up on something in conversation that has nothing to do, you know, and it's helpful, right? Trinita, I'm glad you're going camping. Sometimes activities like that are very, very helpful, right? I have a mess on the back. We're not going to take a look at the back. Yeah, we're not going to look at the back, okay? But that is my quilt to this point, all right? And so now, last week, Dawn asked if I could do a demonstration of a quilt-as-you-go with the applique method. So here's what I did, Dawn, okay? And I did a little pre-work so that we're not here for 5 hours, all right? So I have 2 examples we're going to play with today. All right, 2 examples. They're the same pieces. Whoops, there you go. It's 6-1. See that? Same pieces. But here's what I did, Dawn. And if you're doing the applique version like this, and you want to do quilt-as-you-go, kind of like what, you know, what we're doing with the embroidered version, that's quilt-as-you-go. It's only done in the hoop. If you want to quilt your little blocks as you're going, I'm going to share 2 ways. These are not the only 2 ways to do this, but it's 2 ways that you could do it. Okay, so what I did is first I used my light pad to adhere my little squares on the grid, right? I put this down, I put my fabric over it, and I used my light pad just like we did in the very first video, right? I glue sticked all of my little pieces in, and then I fused them in place, all right? Same as I did in that video. And then when the fabric cooled off, I brought it back over. I had my light pad here, put this on it, and lined up my pieces like so. And with a friction pin, I traced the grid on there. Okay, so when I press this, all of those lines are going to disappear. But it gives me a guide that I could do some straight line quilting and achieve the same look as what we have going on here with the embroidered version. Simple grid, like a crosshatch kind of quilting, right? So that's what I did with this. And then I glue sticked it to my batting and I let it dry overnight, because if I press to dry the glue, I'm going to lose all my lines, right? That's what happens with the friction pin, is it goes away with heat. So I glue sticked it, pressed it, finger pressed it, and I just let it dry overnight. The glue is completely dry, and look how flexible this is, right? But it's glue sticked to my batting. You could add a backing fabric if you want to. I'm not going to. And then I did the same thing, fused all my pieces in place, and then put this back on the grid on my light pad. And all I did this time was traced the inside line, because that's going to give me a guide to square up this block once I'm done quilting. And this one we're going to do some free motion quilting, because doesn't that sound fun? Actually, part of it we're going to do free motion quilting, and part of it I'm going to show you something a little crazy, okay? And I'm going to just draw a line in half that so I remember when I'm at the sewing machine. The first half we're going to do something, and then the second half we'll do some free motion quilting. But guess what? On this version, I would still need to do the little applique zigzag stitch on all of my squares, right? I'd still need to do that. The way that I'm going to do these, no, you wouldn't have to. All right. So that'll give you 3 examples. 3 different ways to do quilt as you go with these pieces. Okay. So what I've done is I've set up my sewing machine with thread that is going to blend into my background color. Okay. And the first thing we're going to do, and it's going to take me a hot little minute. And here's the thing, y'all, I'm going to go quick. So is it going to be exactly perfect? No. But I'm trying to move through it so you can just see. Okay. Ordinarily, if I was doing this and this was my actual quilt piece, I would take my time and I would make sure I was going straight. And, but this is for demonstration purposes only. Okay. So here's my sewing machine. And you're going to notice that I just have my regular foot on. And guess what? I'm just sewing straight over the lines. And I'm going to try to move quickly through it so that we can move on. But I mainly just want you to see how it disappears and leaves the quilting behind when we're finished. The outside lines, I'm not going to stitch because when we join the blocks, it's going to secure the outside lines, okay? And you know what? I am going to switch the foot so I can see a little bit better. If you have an open toe foot, it might be really helpful. I feel like I should be talking, but just to let you know, the microphone doesn't pick my voice up so much while the sewing machine is going. So y'all gonna have to talk amongst yourselves, okay? Okay, so that's all my lines going in one direction. We're going to flip it around and go back the other direction. Yeah, I was just sitting here stitching and I was thinking, you could, if you wanted to do this quilted, grid like I'm doing here at the sewing machine, you could trace it and quilt it and then fuse on your little fabrics, square pixels, if you wanted to, right? Even though I'm doing a straight line quilting and some of the edges, I am sewing over some of the edges of these little pixels. You still got to sew down the edges because not all the edges are being sewn down by this quilting line, right? So you still got to go back and sew down the edges. So you could do the quilting before or after putting your pixels in place. Okay, so that is a simple way to quilt your blogs, right? Before you join them. And you're going to get the same look as the embroidered version, right? And I'm not worried about, like, I don't know if you can see. It's a little hard to see. I stitched over some of the edges because maybe I didn't put my pixel exactly in place, right? But I'm just following these lines. I'm not really worried about that because if I were going to switch the thread color to match my pixels, when I do a little zigzag stitch, I'm going to be covering up anywhere where I might have stitched on the very, very edge of my pixels. Okay? So you could do this before or after adding your pixels in place. All right? We're going to erase the grid here in just a minute, but while we're here at the sewing machine, let me take a sip of this. Mimsy said, how is Moochie doing? Is Dolly getting used to her sister? Dolly is getting better with her sister. Dolly only has so much tolerance. Do you know what I'm saying? But she's doing a lot better with her. Wanda, you found your downloads. Good, I'm glad. I saw you had asked that question earlier before we started. All right, so I'm going to bring in this block. And let's just talk about this for a second, right? So all my pieces are fused in place. I used Heat and Bond Light on the back side of my fabric, so the edges have to be sewn or the pieces have to be sewn. Let's just have a discussion for a second before I start on this part. This is an art quilt, and I feel like we can do things with art quilts that are more lenient than we can with a quilt that's going to be washed and used. Wash and use, washed and used, right? Y'all have heard me say this a lot. But inevitably, if I don't say this, someone's going to ask me, well, what happens when you wash it? The edges are going to lift, okay? But I'm going to show you, like, if you haven't started this quilt yet and you want to, but you're like, that's a lot of dang work. I don't have an embroidery machine. I sure as heck don't want to sew down all the edges of those little pixels. Like, no. But I love the quilt design and I would love to have it and do it, but I'm looking for a little bit of an easier way to do it. All right, so I've got you. If you're not going to use Heat and Bond in the red package and just fuse your pieces in place and go, you want to kind of do a quilt as you go, and you don't mind sewing over top of your pixels, but you don't want to zigzag stitch all of those edges. This is going to be fantastic for you, okay? I'm going to do some squiggly lines across my block. All right. Not all of the edges of the pixels are going to be sewn down, but the pieces themselves will be sewn down, right? So if you were to wash this quilt, would the edges lift up that are not sewn down? Yes, they would. Maybe not right away, but eventually they will. After doing all the work with this quilt, and you make this quilt and the hours involved, you're not going to want to wash this thing, right? It is a piece of art to be displayed. Like if you were to buy a Picasso, would you just take a wash rag to it and wash it off? No, right? This is a piece of art. It's an art quilt, and we can do things, secure these pieces in place, and that will be sufficient to keep them there permanently forever, but don't wash your quilt, right? Okay, so let's go back to the sewing machine. The top half of this, I'm going to do squiggly little lines, quilty lines. I'm going to make sure that I hit all of the pixels at least once, maybe twice. I'm going to do them so they're random, so I don't have to worry about is it going to match up to the block next to it or above it. It's all going to be random squiggly lines going from left to right or horizontally. You could do them vertically if you wanted to, right? If you have a serpentine stitch in your sewing machine, oh, I got number 66 on my machine is a little serpentine stitch. You could choose something like that, right? Or any of the decorative stitches in your machine that we never use. But I'm just going to willy-nilly do some curvy lines. See how fast that was? So there's an idea for quilting your block, right? And then this way, you don't have to sew down the edges of your pixels, right? They're secured to your quilt. They're not going to ever come off. And with the Heat and Bond Light, the edges should stay nice and clean and adhere to the quilt as long as you don't wash it, right? Okay, so, and then down here, I'm going to switch gears. I'm going to take a second. I'm going to put on the free motion foot. If you're looking to explore all different kinds of background quilting designs, right, and you are learning how to do that, go search up some Leah Day videos. For years, I've watched her, and I'm amazed by her. She has umpteen million different filling quilting designs, right? You could do each block a different design. How cool would that be, right? But I'm going to do a free motion stitch, probably just a little meandering stitch, right? And I'm going to make sure, just like I did up here, that I am going over top of each one of these pixels, sewing it down, okay? So let me grab my free motion foot. And I'm going to go ahead and turn my iron on so it's warming up, because this should only take a second, right? And I'm going to lower my stitch length to 0. You could drop the feed dogs if you want to, but this machine actually gets better tension if I don't drop the feed dogs for some reason. Whoopsies, I'm sorry about that. I thought I turned off notifications. I'm sorry, y'all. Let me mute that. We're getting weather alerts because we have a storm coming in this weekend. We're probably going to be stranded down here because the roads are going to flood over. That's weather alerts I'm getting. All right, so I don't remember what I was just saying. Oh yeah, the tension. On this machine, like if you're doing free motion quilting or thread painting, you know, with your machine, and you have lowered the feed dogs and you have horrible tension on the bottom, try doing it without lowering your feed dogs and see if that makes a difference. On this machine, it does not like the feed dogs down. On that machine, it likes the feed dogs down. So I'm going to bring up that bobbin thread to the top. There's both my threads. I don't think you can see them because of the light and because the thread is so light. Needle down. I'm going to take a couple stitches just to lock everything in place. And then I'm going to trim these threads out of the way. And are we doing meandering or are we doing something else? How about some paisleys? I haven't done paisleys in a long time. We'll do some paisleys. Don't judge my paisleys. This thread is really hard to see. All right, I missed a little section right there. I'm gonna go right here and then just travel over and do that little section right there and we're done. All right, so now we're going to bring this back over here. All right, so there's my little gridded one, right? And then I'm going to take my iron and press it flat. There goes all of those lines. You know what I meant to do though? I meant to trim it first. Before you erase your lines, trim your blocks. That's what I meant to do. I just get so ahead of myself. Hold on a second. I don't think I have my good rotary cutter over here, so we're going to struggle with this little baby one. But while you still have your lines there that you traced, right? Trim your block. That way you know it's exactly the size it needs to be, right? Before you erase your lines. And I'm going to bring this one over here since we're cutting. Now I sort of have to guesstimate a little bit. Actually, this little cutter is doing a good job. The blade is nice and sharp on it, at least. All right, so we have our little applique blocks quilted. And if you do something along these lines, you don't even have to stitch down your pixels, right? Here's my little paisley design. All my pixels are sewn to this quilt. They will never raise, they'll never fall off, right? And the heat and bond light is there, fused it to the fabric so that it won't lift. Maybe this is an alternative way for you to make this quilt without having to sew down all the pixels, right? This method with the little grid and a straight line quilting, I would still zigzag all of your little edges because they're not all sewn down. Do you know what I'm saying? They're not. But you have that nice gridded quilting background, right? And maybe you're weird like me and you actually enjoy sewing down all the little pixels. And but you want your blocks to look like the embroidered version, right? And that's all this is just a simple gridded quilting stitch. See that? So there's 3 different ideas, Dawn, for quilt as you go. Then you would just join this and join this. That batting in the seam, I'd cut it out of there because it's going to add some thickness. Ask me how I know. I spent a lot of time cutting batting out of all these seams. So at this point, before you join them, cut that batting out of your seams, right? And then just join your blocks. And there's Quilt As You Go with the applique version. Yeah, that would be Quilt As You Go. Now you could fuse all your pieces in place. Don't stitch them down. Do all the blocks, assemble the quilt together, and then quilt the whole thing with something like this or something like this, and not have to sew down your pixels. but the quilting would be continuous, you know. It wouldn't be like quilt as you go. So there's some ideas for you. Okay. Hi, everybody. Kim said, the serpentine stitch is what I used on my butterfly pixel quilt. Would you use white thread? So the thread choice is going to be something that's really personal and based on your preferences with the fabrics you're using, right? For me, my applique version is this red fabric. It's got little holly leaves on it, right? And then just a cream colored muslin on the back for the background. I'd want my quilting to blend in the background and just add texture, which means I'm stitching cream colored thread over top of my red pieces, right? So up close, you do see the quilting over top of the red, but back up some and it doesn't too much stick out, right? Especially with this paisley design. See that? So I like to match my quilting thread color to my background. So I just get the beautiful quilting texture and take a step or two back and you don't see the quilting lines over the pixels. Of course, that's totally up to you, right? I mean, I know of one or two people who might use these same colors and use a red thread so that the quilting is a highlight in the background and sort of just change the whole dynamics of the quilt, right? And then the red thread would blend in and you wouldn't see it over top of the pixels. So I really feel like it's totally up to you. Right? Okay. Dawn, you are welcome. You're welcome. I hope that gives you a couple ideas. I mean, that's just touching the surface. 3 different things you could do. I actually think that that's a lot of fun. Just doing the little curvy lines right over top of them, right? And, you know, if I hold this up, you don't so much see that cream colored thread on the red fabric, especially down here. Can you use mesh? Sure. So if y'all think back, you know, those of you who saw like the garden archway, or I did an angel mug rug. I did an angel mug rug years ago. And it was a lot of little applique pieces. And it looked like a mosaic tile piece, right? And I covered it with tulle. And I did not stitch down my applique. I just covered the little mug rug with tulle. And then I did some quilting over top of the tulle. I'm trying to think what I did to that. But I know I didn't have to sew down any applique pieces. I just quilted around them. Do you know what I'm saying? The little pixels are 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch. They're tiny. Lindsay said you forgot to mention painting the pixels in. Yeah, I mean we did a demo of that one time, right? But if you want to actually like quilt as you go, these you could cover it with tulle. You certainly could. Thank you, darling. The size of pixels, 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch. Now, if if the thought of cutting out what I think you need like 2,000 and some little 1/2 inch squares, and you want to do the applique version, if you have a ScanNCut or a Cricut, there is an SVG file that will cut 400 of them all at one time. There's a link for that down in the description box. I think it's like $2, I forget, $2 for the SVG, but it'll cut 400 perfect little 1/2 inch squares out of your applique fabric at one time. And so that's what I did, right? And you'll have to do that 5 times to get all the pixels you'll need for this quilt. Or you can just use a rotary cutter and your ruler and cut them out, right? But that's how big they are. I stitch through the paint all the time, and that's one of the biggest reasons why you would add the fabric medium to the paint to begin with. It softens the tooth of the paint and helps it adhere to the fabric. So when you heat set it, depending on the kind of fabric medium you're using, right? When you heat set it, it actually softens up. And so back when we were at the other house, I did a whole series. It was 4 square quilts, and each one of them were different. They were all painted. Like one is a seahorse, one is a light lantern, one is just a stained glass piece, and I forget what the other one is. Those are all painted, and I quilt right through them. Quilt right through them. Now, you would probably want to use maybe a bigger needle, or like an embroidery type of needle that has a longer eye, and perhaps maybe a stronger thread like a polyester thread. But yeah, I stitch right through the paint all the time with my sewing machine. I don't do any hand stitching. The quilt's going to be 40 by 40. Now, Joanne, if you have an embroidery version, if you have an embroidery machine that takes a 5-inch by 5-inch hoop, 5 by 7-inch hoop, 5 by 7, the machine stitches all the pixels for you, and you don't have to cut nothing. So yeah, that's how I would do it. Or, use the heat and bond in the red package, and then just a free motion quilt around your pixels. You don't want to stitch through your pixels if you use the heat and bond in the red package, or any other fusible that says it's permanent and you don't stitch through it, right? I say heat and bond because that's my go-to product. That's what I like for applique. But heat and bond light, yeah, you want to stitch through it. That's how you could do it. Can we see Santa close up? Yes. Sure. Yes. I'll bring it down to my table here in a second, but that's my Santa. I still have the other version, and I'm going to work on it and I'm going to finish it. But I have to make some good progress on this t-shirt quilt that I'm making first. But there's my Santa. And then I'll bring you down to my desk so you can see up close. There he is. Don't you love him? I love him so much. The blocks are you trim them 5.5 by 5.5. Do I have a finished product to see? A finished pixel quilt? Nope, I'm making this along with y'all. I didn't have time to make 2, right? To make 1 before we started. So I'm making mine right along with y'all. Each week the pieces come out. That's when I'm making the pieces. And I wish I had the time. It's just me. I wish I had a design team or a sewing team or a quilting team that I could say, here's my idea, here's the pattern, y'all make it, I'm moving on to something else. And then they make it while I'm doing something else. And then I have it to show all finished before the series starts. That would be awesome. That would be so awesome. Oh yeah, Mincy has a really good point. It's a mystery quilt, so even if I had it finished, I wouldn't show it. I almost forgot. Isn't he awesome? Now you know what I did? Uh, I did this, and then I was like, you know what? Because we were talking, we had a whole discussion about thread painting during a quilt retreat. I was like, you know what? Because I just put this on the long arm and it quilted it really quickly, right? But I was like, you know what? This would be a fun piece to do some thread painting or individual quilting within each of the pieces, something different, right? Plus, I've been wanting to figure this out too. But look how big this is. I sublimated him on a big piece of fabric. So there he is. So what I want to figure out is, if you look, you can see the line where the paper overlapped to join the picture together. I want to be able to print this without getting that line right there. So I have to figure that out. But this was actually printed on microfiber, a microfiber flat sheet. It is so soft and smooth and silky, right? And the colors are fantastic because, of course, it is synthetic material, right? The colors are phenomenal. But I'm going to experiment printing him on some cotton poly or poly cotton. And I'm also going to print him on the regular polyester poplin fabric that I print my photos on, because that is phenomenal and you can stitch through that. But I just want to try a couple of experiments for thread painting. Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah. Wanda said, you need a Mrs. Claus. I do. So, yep, that's my plans for this one. But, so I have a 16 by 24 inch heat press, but my printer only does 13 by 19. So I printed it off as a poster and I overlapped it so I could join and make it a bigger print. And then I got a board from Lowe's, and you put it on the board and you move the board in the press, so it's a way to sublimate things that are bigger than your heat press. So I'm playing around with that. And then I'm playing around with a new t-shirt quilt design, something I've never done before. So it's been kind of like really exciting. This whole week has been like something new all the time, every day. Can we see your t-shirt quilt you're working on? Dawn, it's in pieces. It's in pieces, draped on the bars behind me. And I'm a little nervous of showing the state it's in. I'm a little nervous about it, just being honest with you, because it's new for me. Do you know what I'm saying? It's not like anything I've ever done before. And so, it makes me nervous. There's my Santa, y'all. let's come back here. I saw Barbara went to town. She got Santa and she went to town. She posted it. I saw it right before we came on live today. She did such a good job. Y'all, untraditional things like using crayons on quilts. You know, I didn't invent that. I saw that on YouTube like 7 or 8 years ago. And I think it's genius, right? Again, you can do things on art quilts that you wouldn't necessarily do on a traditional quilt, right? Wanda said, I can imagine what your dreams are like with all these different projects. Actually, I had a very disturbing dream last night. That is so weird. I had a really weird dream last night. Or it was right before I woke up. And I was like, why did I dream that? That was so random. That was weird. So there we are, y'all. Trying to think of anything else. Dawn, I hope that was helpful for you. I hope that sparked some ideas. I mean, I hope you could use one of those 3 ideas, or maybe it sparked an idea for something totally different, but a way to do quilt as you go with your applique version. For those doing the embroidered version, I hope that little extra basting box is helpful. I think it's going to save me so much time trimming the batting. It's going to save me a lot of time. But yeah. Good, I'm glad, Dawn. All right, y'all. I saw when I mentioned the weather this weekend that many of y'all said you had the same kind of alerts, right? North Carolina, other places. You know what? I think if it were cold, this would be a big snow event. What do you think? I think we'd be snowed in this weekend if it were cold outside. My parents invited us over for supper tonight, so I don't have to worry about cooking supper tonight. So that's nice, right? All right, everybody. I think that's everything. Thanks for hanging out with me, even if you're not making this quilt. And I hope that, you know what I really hope? No pressure. But I hope that if you've been on the fence about this quilt and you're like, that's a lot of work. I don't mind cutting the pixels out, you know, rotary cutter and a ruler. I can cut the little squares out, but sewing them down, what a pain in the A. Maybe today has sparked an idea for you. And you're like, you know what? That's not that bad. I think I'm going to make the quilt now. Oh, Wanda, y'all having chicken wings tonight. I would tell them y'all said hi. Thank you, Chrissy. Y'all have a good weekend too. Hug Gan for me. Tell her I said hi. Or Gan, if you're watching, I'm going to tell you directly. I love you. Thank you so much for hanging out with me every week. I think about y'all all the time. Joanne said, do you use sashing to connect your blocks on Quilt as you go? You certainly could. On this particular quilt, I believe the sashing would mess up the design. Do you know what I'm saying? I think because the whole theme of this quilt is supposed to, when you step back and look at it, up close it just looks like thousands of little squares, right? But when you step back and look at it, it's supposed to look like handwork, like cross stitch or a knitted sweater, right? So if you were to add sashing to your blocks, you would sort of break that pattern up and it wouldn't look as, I don't think the design would come together as easily. Do you know what I'm saying? Now we have joined Quilt-as-you-go quilts with sashing, and it looked phenomenal, and it was a great way to join the blocks, right? I think for this particular quilt, maybe a sashing on the back to cover the seams. If you quilt if you add a backing and then do your quilting like this, and then you square it all up and you join them, adding a sashing on the back would be a great way to cover up the seams, right? But I would avoid adding a sashing to the front of this particular quilt. All right, y'all, I am off. I'm going to work on this t-shirt quilt just a little bit longer before calling it a day. And I'm sure Munchie is going to be waking up. That dog has to go out like every hour on the hour. She has way much more energy than I do. And let me just tell you, I think since we got her, it's almost been 2 weeks. She's like doubled in size. And why can't they stay little babies longer? She's still adorable. She's still super cute. Sometimes she's a little bit annoying, okay? But I love her so much. She's doing great. Okay, everybody. I will see y'all next Friday. Stay safe over the weekend. Have fun sewing and crafting, whatever you're doing. And be sure to share pictures over on the Creative Crew. We'd love to see what you're working on, even if it's not this quilt. Maybe it's the Santa. Maybe it's a bag. Who knows what you're doing? Share it over there. Bye, everybody.
In the quiet of the evening light, with needles dancing, stitching him tight, each patch a story, every thread unbinding love and fabric where we belong. Every stitch a whispered prayer, in every corner I find you there. Oh, sweet patchwork of our days, stitched together in so many ways, with every thread our lives entwined, in this cool to love, our hearts aligned.